Okay, so are you ready to explore like a period that's like totally shrouded in mystery? We're talking about the years after Jesus' time in Rome.
Yeah.
We're diving deep into the Urantia book for this one. And, a lot of the historical texts we've looked at, they kind of just like tiptoe around this period.
Yeah.
But in this book, we get a glimpse of Jesus as a teacher,
Right.
engaging in these like thought-provoking dialogues with just everyday people.
It's captivating, how this excerpt really emphasizes Jesus' humanity. It's all about his travels with Guno. He's an Indian merchant.
Okay.
And his son, Gunit.
Right.
And it really showcases, I think, the power of like cross-cultural exchange.
Yeah.
And just the universal nature of his teachings,
It really does. It sets the stage for some really insightful conversations. So they slip out of room quietly after Jesus spends about a year teaching there. No big farewell tour, just kind of subtle, almost like he's letting the seeds he's planted just kind of take root.
Yeah, it's such an intriguing detail, and I think it speaks volumes. This quiet departure, it suggests that influencing hearts and minds, it doesn't always require a loudspeaker.
Right, right.
Sometimes it's about a gentler approach, just allowing those ideas to resonate, to spread naturally.
Yeah, and they head out on the Appian Way, going through all the different cultures and people of the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're not even in a hurry to get to the next destination.
Right,
It's more about the journey and what they're learning along the way.
And this journey unfolds against this backdrop of like societal change. The Roman Empire at this time was this huge melting pot. Cultures, social classes, ideologies, all kind of like clashing and mixing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that makes their encounters even more potent because it's like Jesus' teachings, they become timeless against this backdrop of like a world in flux, much like our own.
Right.
Right.
Right. And wow, do they encounter some, I guess you could call them like teachable moments?
They do.
There's this one incident on the road where Jesus, he steps in to stop this bully who's picking on a younger boy.
Yeah.
You'd expect something really dramatic.
Yeah.
Maybe even like divine intervention, but it's really different than that.
It's in those moments where you see the real depth emerge.
Right.
So instead of just immediate punishment, which is kind of what Ganid expects, Jesus offers this really nuanced perspective. He makes this distinction between individual acts of mercy,
Okay.
like when you step in to protect someone, versus the actual like execution of justice, which is much more complex and requires this like broader societal framework and impartial judgment. It's not always so clear.
And it makes you think, like, how quick are we to judge based on incomplete information, especially now with social media?
Right.
It's a good point.
Yeah, and it's this really powerful reminder for all of us, I think, to approach situations with more empathy, with humility, recognizing that, like, we don't always have the full story.
It's so true.
It has a timeless message. It transcends cultural boundaries. The incident really prompts us, I think, to examine our own biases.
Yeah.
And to remember that justice, true justice, like you were saying, necessitates that commitment to understanding the bigger picture, something that we often overlook.
And this commitment to kind of confronting these societal norms continues in their very next encounter, this time in Tarentum. They see this man mistreating his wife. So Jesus, he intervenes, as you'd expect, but he does it in this really unexpected way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Instead of condemning the guy, Jesus chooses empathy. He recognizes that there's an internal struggle going on within this man.
Right.
And he gently guides him towards a more enlightened perspective, you could say. This encounter becomes this opportunity for Jesus to talk about this deeply rooted issue, even back then, of gender inequality.
Yeah.
Which was, radical for that time.
It's pretty amazing how Jesus frames equality, this idea of equality, as a partnership with the divine.
Right.
He really emphasizes men's responsibility for respect and protection. He even makes this parallel to the divine relationship between the Father and the Spirit Mother, at least according to Urantia.
Right.
Which is just, it's fascinating.
It's revolutionary, even today, right?
Yeah.
Like this idea that equality is rooted in something divine.
Right.
It challenges us to really think differently, to reevaluate our relationships, our societal structures. It recognizes that true partnership can only exist when there's mutual respect.
Yeah.
And when we start dismantling those power dynamics that are harmful.
And it's like every interaction they have becomes this opportunity for Jesus to kind of challenge things, and so those seeds of change. And speaking of change, their journey takes them to Corinth.
Oh, cool.
It was this huge, bustling city, really diverse, known for, well, let's just say a more open-minded way of looking at morality, I guess, than what they'd seen before.
Yeah, Corinth was like the ultimate melting pot.
It kind of mirrors the complexities of our world today, in a way, a fusion of cultures, beliefs, ways of life. I think it's the perfect setting to see how universal Jesus' teachings really were.
Right.
And how they connected with people from all these different backgrounds.
And it's in Corinth where we start to see these ripples, like the effects of Jesus' teachings starting to take hold. He's really captivated by Judaism at this point.
Yeah.
He even says he wants to see what it's like at a synagogue service.
That fascination with Judaism is so telling. It shows how when you're exposed to new ideas, it can really spark something.
The curiosity, this longing to explore your spirituality.
Yeah.
It also shows, I think, how interconnected all these faith traditions are.
Yeah.
Like these common threads of wisdom that tie us all together.
It's true. And so while Ganid is over there checking out the synagogue, totally engrossed in the rituals and the community there, Jesus is talking to Crispus, who's the synagogue ruler. They have this really deep theological discussion.
Which, knowing what we know about Crispus, is really significant. I mean, years later, he converts to Christianity along with his whole family.
Right, with Paul.
Exactly. It's like this subtle foreshadowing, It emphasizes how much these encounters mattered.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that these seeds that are planted in one moment, they can blossom in ways you never expect.
Right. It's like this chain reaction.
Yeah. And it shakes history.
Yeah.
The way our beliefs evolve. That's pretty amazing to think about.
Yes. And speaking of unexpected encounters, there's this incident in Corinth with the courtesans. It really shows just how boundless Jesus's compassion was.
More than any other encounter. I think this one shows how Jesus saw beyond the labels that society puts on people.
Right.
He recognized that every single person has inherent dignity, regardless of their situation, their past.
Yeah.
Ganid, he's obviously uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He judges, which is understandable for the time.
Sure.
But Jesus responds with empathy, as always.
And that's such an important lesson for all of us, right? To challenge our own assumptions about people. Jesus didn't condone their actions, obviously, but he also didn't condemn them.
Yep.
He made that connection with them, acknowledged their humanity. He recognized that there are these bigger forces at play sometimes.
It's true, and it challenges us to consider how complex the human experience is, right? To not just make these snap judgments about people.
Oh, yeah.
Based on how they look, their social standing, whatever. It's a call to lead with compassion, with understanding. To remember that everybody has a story, a journey that led them to where they are.
And in this really remarkable moment, Jesus, he invites these women to share a meal at the home of this Jewish merchant, Justus.
Wow.
Justus is a devout follower of Jewish law. So for Jesus to do this, it's this radical act.
It was definitely breaking some norms.
He's blurring the lines, making them confront their own prejudices.
That's what I love about his approach to social change. He doesn't just talk about acceptance. He lives it, creates these moments of genuine connection that cut through all those societal barriers.
It makes you realize that sometimes the biggest transformations don't happen through speeches or grand gestures.
Right.
It's those simple acts of kindness, shared meals, the willingness to welcome those that society has deemed unworthy.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity. And from the heart of Corinth, they travel east.
Okay.
Drawn to Athens, the intellectual hub of the ancient world. I think this shift eastward is important because we move from exploring social dynamics to, like, the realm of philosophy, the pursuit of knowledge.
Athens with all its philosophers and thinkers. I can only imagine what it was like for Jesus to navigate that world.
Right. It was all about logic and reason.
Yeah.
But he always emphasized the heart and spirit, too.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast. So tell me, what happens when he meets these Athenian thinkers? Did they find any common ground?
So one night, Jesus is at his lodging.
Okay.
And he ends up talking with a Greek philosopher. And this philosopher, he's going on and on about observation, the power of the human intellect.
Okay.
And Jesus is listening so intently. And when it's his turn to speak, he doesn't contradict the guy.
It's that respectful approach that makes his teaching so powerful, right?
Exactly. He meets people where they are, acknowledges their perspective, and then ever so gently guides them to this broader understanding.
I like that.
So he says that science and logic are important, of course.
Yeah.
He even says that scientists may one day understand gravity, light, electricity. But even then, he says they'll never fully grasp the essence of these forces.
Interesting. So he's not saying science is bad, just that it's only part of the story.
Right. It's like science is about how the universe works.
Okay.
But spirituality is about the why, the meaning behind it all. And true wisdom, he's saying, comes from recognizing that these two things are connected.
It's like he's advocating for this holistic view of reality, right?
Yeah.
One that embraces the things we can see and touch and the things we can't.
Yes. And he cautions against relying too much on logic and math when it comes to human interaction. He actually uses a really good analogy.
I love a good analogy. Tell me more.
He asks the philosopher, if you have 10 men shearing a sheep, would it be 10 times faster than just one man? And of course, mathematically, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But in reality,
Yeah.
those 10 men would probably just get in each other's way.
That's such a great point. We're not always predictable. And yeah, sometimes too many cooks really do spoil the broth.
Exactly. He's highlighting that human beings are complex.
Hmm.
You can't just put us into a formula.
Especially in our data-driven world, it's good to remember that some things can't be measured or calculated.
And as their journey continues, we'll see how this idea of bridging the gap between the physical world and the spiritual world keeps coming up,
Okay.
especially when they get to their next destination, Ephesus.
So from Athens, where it was all logic and reason, they go to Ephesus, this amazing city with the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's like each stop on their journey focuses on a different part of what it means to be human.
It's true. We had justice and mercy out on the open road.
Right.
Then social dynamics in Corinth, all that hustle
Yeah.
and bustle.
Yeah.
Athens was the life of the mind. And now in Ephesus, it's all about the soul.
And it's interesting because even though Ephesus has this incredible temple, Jesus seems more interested in these quiet conversations that he's having.
Yeah, the grandeur of that temple. It doesn't seem to faze him much. You can almost picture Ganid, though, totally in awe of it all.
Oh, I bet. Maybe even picking up some souvenirs along the way.
Well, he is pretty captivated by this silver shrine to Artemis, which, thinking about his background, makes sense.
Oh, yeah, right. The divine feminine is a big part of Indian religion.
Exactly. But you're right. Jesus is having these deep conversations, exploring the human spirit.
Yeah.
It's like he's drawing this distinction between, like, outward expressions of faith, and the inward journey of the soul.
I guess you. And this theme of inner exploration, it really comes up in this conversation that Jesus has with the scholar.
And they're talking about the soul, which is something the scholar seems really preoccupied with.
Well, yeah, the soul. It's a mystery. People have been debating it forever.
Right. And the scholar is wrestling with this question. What is the soul? How do we even know it exists if we can't see it or measure it?
I mean, it's a good question, right?
It is.
How do you reconcile something that's supposed to be spiritual with the physical world? So how does Jesus respond to that?
Well, he describes the soul as this self-reflective, truth-discerning, and spirit-perceiving part of man. And he points out that it's not just self-awareness that makes us different from animals.
Okay.
Even they have that to some degree.
True.
It's more about our moral conscience,
That internal compass we have.
Exactly. That ability to tell right from wrong. To me, that's what makes humans different.
And it's interesting that Jesus doesn't say we can prove the soul exists through science or anything. It's more about experiencing it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's this experiential reality, like you said. Some truths, especially about the soul, you have to live them to understand them.
It's true. It reminds me of that saying, the heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. So they leave Ephesus, and it's almost like their travels start mirroring these ideas that Jesus has been talking about.
I like that, how you put that. They've seen all these different places, met all these different people.
Yeah.
And now they're headed to Cyprus, where things take a bit of a turn.
Yeah, they go to the mountains of Cyprus to relax a bit. But then Ganid gets really sick.
Right. It's a reminder that even when things seem peaceful, life can throw you a curveball.
And it makes you wonder, do those tough moments happen for a reason? Is there something to learn from them?
It's definitely something to think about. And yeah, we don't always know why things happen, but we can choose how we respond. And what does Jesus do?
What does he do?
He becomes the compassionate caregiver, uses his knowledge of healing to help Ganid get better.
He's like a teacher, a healer, and a wilderness medic all rolled into one.
Right. And once Ganid recovers their conversations, they start to focus on the human mind.
Makes sense. When you're that close to, your own mortality, you start asking those big questions. What does it mean to be conscious? Are we that different from animals?
And Jesus, being Jesus, he offers this really insightful perspective. He says that animals, They experience things, they even have memories. But they're not self-reflective. They don't have those inner dialogues that we have as humans.
So self-awareness is key.
Right. But it's more than that. It's also about understanding our place in time. He calls it time self-consciousness, this ability to reflect on the past, think about the future.
So it's like having this moral memory, knowing that our actions have consequences that can last.
Exactly. And when you understand that we're all interconnected across time, it makes you really think about your choices. It adds this weight of responsibility.
For sure. It makes you want to live intentionally. And it reminds me of those hidden influences we talked about before.
Yeah, how the people we meet, the things we go through, even the little things, they shape who we become.
And they eventually make it to Antioch, which is this really interesting city, known for both its trade and its, let's just say, less than wholesome reputation.
Right. And it's at Antioch where you see Jesus getting more introspective. Like he knows what's coming in Palestine. Like he's preparing himself.
Getting ready to step back into his destiny.
Exactly. And finally, they arrive in the city where Abraham was born. Talk about a place that's rich in history.
Wow, what a setting for a final conversation. So what's on Ganid's mind as he's about to say goodbye?
Well, he's still got questions, of course. He asks about the difference between knowledge, wisdom, and truth.
That's a big one.
Right. Like, what is wisdom?
So how does Jesus answer that?
He doesn't give him a straight definition. He says, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. With all your quest for knowledge, get understanding. Basically, knowledge is important, but it's what you do with it that matters.
And that's what wisdom is, right?
Yeah, it's about taking what you know and using it to understand the world, to live a good life.
So they say goodbye, and Ganid and his father head to India. And they have no idea that the man they knew as Joshua will someday be known as Jesus of Nazareth.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It really is. I mean, they had this amazing journey, talked about justice, equality, the soul, the pursuit of wisdom.
All without ever really knowing who their teacher was?
It just goes to show that true wisdom, it goes beyond titles and labels. So I guess the question for all of us is, who are those hidden influences in our own lives? What are those seeds of wisdom that have led us to where we are today?
That's a great question. And it's a reminder to be open to the unexpected, to approach life with curiosity, with humility. Because sometimes the most important lessons come from the quiet conversations, the shared meals, and just the act of walking alongside a teacher, open to whatever they have to teach us.
That's a great place to wrap up.